Hi, and welcome back to the channel. And what are we going to do today? Well, if you've been keeping up with the channel, then recently you would have seen that I've done a couple of videos on this machine here, which is a Macintosh LC475. But in reality, it wasn't really about this machine per se. It was more about a card which I have inside it, which is the Apple IIe Card, which is something of a grail card for those people out there in the Apple II community. Also, obviously, for Macintosh owners, because, well, yeah, you need to have a Macintosh LC if you're going to use one of those cards. The card was designed by Apple to get people from the Apple II to start using Macintoshes, a kind of Trojan horse, as it were. The way it works is you put the card in an LC, and it has to be specifically generally an LC, and that's because they were designed specifically, their graphics have been adapted so that they work with the Apple IIe card. They basically provide the modes that the IIe card needs to use. That's why it works in there. And then you use a piece of software, which you can see here, Apple IIe Startup, and you start that piece of software, and then it goes into a control panel if you want to, where you can configure the card, and then you boot up the machine. What's really cool about the card is that it allows you to use physical disk drives, as you can see here. This is an original 5¼ disk drive, a working one. I also have the floppy EMU here, and that can emulate 3.5" disks as well. I don't actually have the correct model of 3.5" disk for this particular setup, but I hope to get one in the future. But for now, I actually do have 2 more of these disk drives, so I'm probably going to set up this machine with 2, which is pretty cool. And as I said, you can also use the floppy EMU to get data onto the machine as well. So yeah, go back and watch those videos. There's 2 of them. One of them where I talk about the card in general, you know, how it works, the graphics, a little bit of information there about the Apple IIe's graphics, which is quite interesting as well. And then in the second video, I'm focusing more on media. You know, how do you use the disk drives with the IIe card? And it's aimed at people who don't necessarily have a lot of experience with Apple IIs. I always tend to think that, you know, everybody in America used an Apple II back in the day, but in fact they didn't, because it was a really expensive machine. And on top of that, not everybody is my age, so they wouldn't necessarily have been old enough to actually have used one of these machines. And of course, in the future, as time goes on, that's going to become more and more the case, obviously, as we get older. And hopefully younger people will come along and give these machines a try and enjoy them. So that's why I don't necessarily always in my videos aim at very experienced people. One could argue that why bother, because if they're extremely experienced, they're not going to learn anything or hardly anything from certain videos, are they? Unless you make extremely technical, extremely narrow videos, which look at a, you know, a very tiny aspect of the whole Apple II experience. So anyway, that's the last couple of videos. What are we doing today? Well, this machine is a little bit sickly. And it's sickly in 2 different ways. Number one, the graphics. You can see there that the background to the Windows has these yellow stripes. The machine is currently in 256 color mode. And that means that those lines are yellow. They're not meant to be there. There's a problem with the graphics chip, I think, or at least the graphics pipeline. And if you put this machine into other modes, for instance, 16 color, or I believe black and white, that problem becomes worse, because I think in 16 color they become purple. I think I'll be able to demonstrate that to you in a short while. And in black and white mode, they could become black. So yeah, they're extremely noticeable. I think in gray mode, for some reason, they come out as white. Maybe it's just coincidental that it becomes white, and it becomes quite unnoticeable really in grayscale. But in 256, 16 color black and white, it's very, very noticeable, and it's a bit of a pain, to be honest. But it's not the kind of thing that you fix with a click of fingers. And that's why I thought it was more important that I get on with the Apple IIe card video, you know, and videos about the LC475 and so on and so forth. But it's now come to the point where I think I've got some time where I should fix this before I move on to other projects. And so to fix it, I actually ordered the caps to recap the machine, and I'm hoping that will fix the problem. I say I'm hoping. Realistically, I'm not that confident that that would actually fix the problem. Almost certainly it won't, but it's not going to harm. This is a machine that comes from the era of what they call the cap plague. Capacitors during this era, electrolytic ones, which have literally a liquid in them wrapped around in a little sort of napkin, as it were. They can, over time, break out of their canister and start to leak. And the electrolytic comes out and it starts to eat away at the logic board. And it actually can destroy machines if you're not careful. As you can see, this machine is pretty functional, apart from the graphics problem. So hopefully my caps haven't leaked. But that's probably the best time when to actually recap the machine. Get rid of the old caps and put new caps on whilst you know it's okay. I know this machine hasn't been recapped because I bought it from a school teacher, as far as I'm aware. I didn't really speak to them, but I picked it up from a school. So I'm assuming that that teacher has worked at that school for a very long time and they got this back in the 90s to actually teach at the school. I very much doubt they would have recapped this machine. This has probably been sitting in a cupboard for a very, very long time before I bought it. But it is, like I said, actually in pretty good condition. The power supply seems to be working fine. As you can see, there's no glitching or anything like that. But there is another problem. When I finished the video on the disk drive use, it actually stopped working. The disk drive side of it became flaky. And I was going to demonstrate that to you today, but today it's working. So yeah, it's on and off, not working. And I was thinking, was it because of the way I had the card plugged in? But I don't think so, because I hadn't touched it. And today, you know, I did actually take it out and put it back in just in case that was the problem, but it didn't fix the problem. So I didn't think it was a physical connection problem. I mean, it could be. So that's something I should probably do as well, is put some kind of contact cleaner into the socket. You never know, maybe it's oxidized. But I also think it's a good opportunity as well to recap the IIe card, which is in there as well. So let me boot up the machine so you can actually see it in action, just in case you haven't seen those videos. But please do go and see those videos. If you haven't been here before, then please take time to like the video today if you can, and also subscribe if you've not subscribed to the channel before. And what really, oh, actually, hang on a second. Oh, there we are, it's fine. What really helps the channel as well is if you can join the channel too, because that will help give us a small amount of funds. The amount of money that you actually do spend on that is up to you. We have different tiers, but it really helps if you can join the channel so that we can buy more equipment and make the channel better. For example, when I do repair videos, I would really like to have a camera that I can talk to so you can see me when I'm actually repairing things. And you'll see in this video that I don't have that, because right now the only camera I have is the camera that I'm filming on here. And cameras, as you know, they're very expensive. So it would be great if you could help out by joining the channel. And then in the future, hopefully we'll get another camera, and then, you know, we'll improve my videos in the future and it'll just help the channel to grow. So yeah, anyway, I just thought I'd say that before we carry on. So as you can see right now, Choplifter is working perfectly fine. It's booted up off the floppy EMU. I haven't got the physical drive plugged in right now. But before I started filming, I tested the physical drive as well, and that's actually working perfectly fine. Got a copy of Oregon Trail that I wrote onto a disk here, and I showed how to do that in the last video. So yeah, go back and watch the last video if you want to see how to do that. And it's pretty cool because I managed to write it from the floppy EMU, which on the surface doesn't work when it's plugged into the back of this drive, which is what you have to do. You have to daisy chain them to get them both visible at once. But when you do that, funnily enough, the physical disk drive doesn't work. The floppy EMU carries on working, but the physical disk drive doesn't work, so you can't actually write anything. But in the last video, I showed a little trick how to do that. So yeah, that's quite useful if you want to learn how to do that. So as you can see, it's booting up fine. The graphical problems are still here. Do you see those lines? And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to quit out. And when I do so, you can see that you have these very strong purple lines. That's because it's actually quit out into 16 color mode. It's one of the quirks of the Apple IIe card that when you quit out of it, sometimes it doesn't go back. In fact, it mostly doesn't go back to the graphics mode that you set it in, which is a bit of a pain. And as you can see in 16 color mode, it's very, very visible, but it's always there. You always have these problems. So definitely we wanted to see if we can actually fix the graphics today. So anyway, before we carry on, what I think I'll do is we'll have a quick look inside, and I'm just going to show you what we're going to do inside the machine today. Okay, so let's take the lid off. I've already popped it actually. I've just left it on loosely. And that's because in the last video I was taking it off a lot so I could get access to the micro SD card there in the blue SCSI drive. Okay, so let me come around to the other side so I can get out of the way. So inside what we have right now is a blue SCSI using a microSD adapter to load up hard disks, emulated hard disks off a microSD card here. Behind it, we've got the SCSI connector, the battery, and then we've got the Apple IIe card here. Underneath here, you can see we've got an electrolytic capacitor. We've got another one here, another one here. I know there's one here. There are some inside the power supply as well. We are going to be doing that as well. And I believe there are a couple underneath the IIe card. So let me just take out the IIe card. There we go. Okay, so there's the Apple IIe card, a thing of wonder. And here you can see it has a capacitor here and has a capacitor at this end. This comes from the same era as the LC475. So definitely a candidate for capacitor leakage and failure over time. So this is something that we'll be recapping in this video. I've already bought the caps for this, and I've bought tantalums, which are basically, I think they're polymer-based capacitors. They tend to go short when they fail. They don't leak. Going short isn't necessarily the best way to fail either, but it does have the one benefit, which is that when it shorts, they don't leak. They're not going to cause the card to get damaged. So I think it's the best thing to do for this card for the future. Never actually taken off surface mounted capacitors before. It's something that I need to learn. So what I've done is I've actually bought a special iron with two soldering irons. I think they're called tweezer irons. And I'm going to try and use that for the first time in this video today to take off all the capacitors. So yeah, this will be one of the things I'll be recapping. And then, as I said, there are two more capacitors here and another two here. The reason why I said that separately is because I know for a fact that these have a certain rating, and then these and all the other electrolytic capacitors on the board are all actually the same rating, which obviously makes it a lot easier because you can just buy a good decent amount of caps and get on with it. So I think what we're going to do to start off with is I think the card is actually much more valuable than the machine, which is a kind of crazy thing to say. This is a super rare card. So I'm going to learn on the LC475 first. I know that may sound sacrilegious, but you've got to start somewhere, right? I'm going to start on the logic board on here by recapping it, and then I'm going to do the card last, because not only am I removing the electrolytic capacitors, but I'm also putting on tantalum capacitors, and they're a slightly different shape, and they look to me to be slightly more difficult in a way to solder on. So all of that being said, let's move on and get the board out of the case, and let's get it over to the workbench where we can start to do some repairs on it. But before we do that, let's have a quick word from our sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay, where you can make your tech dreams a reality. And right now, PCBWay is celebrating 11 years of excellence. Just makes me wonder how many people have actually made things with PCBWay over that time. I've put in orders, and I've seen many other people in the community put in orders too. Anyway, I'm just glad they're around. And if you go to their website right now and click on enter, you can get some coupons which will actually give you discounts on your future orders. So why not head over to PCBWay? Because whether it's PCB prototyping, PCB assembly, 3D printing, or even CNC machining, PCBWay is the way. Starting with an instant quote for your PCB projects, PCBWay will leap into action, building your PCB, assembling it for you if you wish, and once it's passed their quality tests, it'll be winging its way to you in a flash. PCBWay, PCB prototyping the easy way. Okay, let's hope I can get this out without too much fuss. You know where it goes. Sometimes it takes a bit of learning to see how you actually get something out. So, power out. VGA cable. This is the VGA adapter, which I've been using for capturing. Very important. There we are. Just pop it on the table behind. And out come the ADB cable for the keyboard. Then we need to take out, let's see, if we've got this cable here, which is not used, this would be for the power supply for the hard drive. So let's just make our life a bit easier and take that out. Can I take that out? There we are. And now for the SCSI cable, can I do that? Just wriggle that side to side. Great. Now the fan. I'm assuming it's the fan. Oh, that's the speaker actually. Let's take the speaker out. There we go. Now the fan. We're going to be replacing this fan, don't forget. So we ideally need to keep this and reuse it. And it comes out with some clips actually. So let's see if I can get the fan out without breaking the clips. There we go. There we are. And there's some nasty dust under there. Ooh, black, yeah. So we'll clean that up a little bit later before we put the fan back. And now for the power supply. There we are. And now for the floppy. It's a very tiny cable for the floppy actually. There we go. That's that. That's all clear. Now then, how does this come out? Of course, yeah, I'm overthinking here, I think a bit. I think it's these guys here. Yeah, it's not going to move forward because the lugs hit them. So yeah, one of the great things about this machine and one of the worst things about this machine is Apple used plastic to clip everything in place. So it's a toolless, system. The downside is now I've got to run the gauntlet of bending back 30-year-old plastic to release the logic board. So please don't blame me if they break, because yeah, it could happen. I'll try and be gentle, but let's see what happens. Okay, so let's just bend. Oh, that's horrible. Oh, that's quite a lot. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Yeah, it's really not good, having to do this. There we are. And then that aligns with those lugs, like I was saying, and now I should be able to lift the board out. There we go. It's actually quite a diddy board, isn't it? Yeah. So yeah, let's get this over to the bench, and I'm going to give it a look over with my magnifying glass. As I said, I don't have a microscope at this point. Like I said, if you can join the channel, that could help me to, pay for things like that. But anyway, we'll make do with my jeweler's goggles, and I'll take a look at this. And I think what I might actually do, to be honest, before I start looking at it, is just give it a wash, because it's quite dirty. So yeah, I think I'll do that. Let it dry, and then take a look at it tomorrow, I think. Leave it to dry overnight. Yeah, I think that's a good idea, because it's actually looking pretty dirty. And if there is any cap juice which has come out already, it'd be a good opportunity to get rid of that. So yeah, let me do that now. Okay, so the board is out of the machine. I've got to say, when you look at it now, it does look quite dirty, quite grimy. So definitely it's going to benefit from having a bit of a cleaning today. I'm not going to do that on camera. I'm just going to get it done and then let it dry. What I would say is, yeah, it's looking a bit dusty and a bit grimy around the place, but there's no signs of any sort of damage or anything like that. And I don't think this was ever taken out of the machine. Now, there is some issue, obviously, with the graphics over in this area. I'm not sure what the graphics chip is. Maybe this one here. Nice big chip, isn't it? Hopefully that is the graphics chip, because if it does have to be removed, then maybe it's an easy one to take off. I'm guessing these are PALs or GALs or something like that. But yeah, there's definitely a problem with the graphics with this machine. So what I'll have to do is actually look at these traces and see if they all tone out going to here. Then I'll have to work out what is the graphics chip, and then actually look at that with the oscilloscope and try and work out if there is a certain data line where there is nothing going on, or an address line. I'm hoping it's just a trace break on the board. That would be the easiest fix. A little bit of wire, then we could patch it. But potentially there's a problem with the graphics chip, although it's a bit weird that it only happens on one data bit by the looks of it. So I've already taken out the battery, barrel battery, so we don't want to be washing that. The 68040 I've already leveraged out off camera using a screwdriver, which sounds a bit brutal, but the technique that I use is I put it in to a gap and then turn it, and that moved it up ever so slightly over here, turn it, and then go all the way around, gradually increasing the turn until the CPU leverages out of the socket quite cleanly without causing any damage to the socket. So that's good. So this is a 68040, and it's a 25 megahertz version, as you can see there. As far as I'm aware, this was the actual CPU that came with the machine. When I got the machine, I don't think it had a heatsink on, so this is actually my work. This was done a few years ago, and this is just an aluminium heatsink. So the reason why I've taken it out is, number one, I don't want to wash it, but number two, over here, I actually have a bunch of 68040s, which I bought a few years ago. Let me show these to you. And I think one of these is actually not a purchase. I think this was one that I actually pulled out of a machine. Actually, no, it was this one. Yeah, this is an LC, so this is a low cost. So this has the FPU removed. I'm not sure if it came from this machine. Don't think so, but you know, you never know, maybe. But yeah, it's a 25 megahertz part, low cost, so it has no FPU. So that's probably the cheapest and least fun 6840 that you want to have in your retro machines because it doesn't have an FPU. But of course, FPUs aren't used in everything, so very often it doesn't really matter. So yeah, that's why I've kept that, still a useful chip. Then we have another one, which is a full 6840 running at 25 megahertz again. And then what we have here is a full 68040, but it's running at 40 megahertz. So this is the chip that I'm going to put back in this machine. Let me just move these out of the way. And obviously I'm going to have to put a heatsink on this. I did previously remove a heatsink and I couldn't get this stuff off. It was just absolutely bonded to here. Maybe it's some kind of epoxy resin or something. I tried heat, I tried isopropyl alcohol, various other things, and yeah, just couldn't get it off. So hopefully that won't have too much of an effect on cooling the chip. I'm going to put a nice, I think I've got a copper heatsink to put on this, so that should be pretty good cooling on this. So yeah, let's get this off. I'm going to take it into my bath because it's just the easiest place to put it in. A little bit of washing up liquid, get a bit of soapy water, warm water, and then I'm just going to give this a scrub all over and try and get all this grime off. And then once that's done, I'm going to blow dry it. I have a high-speed air gun. Here it is. And I'm going to blow all the water off it, and then I'm going to leave it to dry outside. I don't think it's going to rain today, so it should be okay. So yeah, the first thing, let's get it cleaned. Hi, welcome back. Well, I've washed the board, and when it came out of the bath, it actually looked pretty clean, but I found there were lots of sort of grotty looking areas around these chips. That was the flux residue from, I guess, what, 30 plus years ago when this was first made. So I washed that off then with copious amounts of alcohol and then actually tested the board. I just wanted to make sure I hadn't caused any damage when I washed it. So I had to plug everything back in. I didn't put it back in the case, but I plugged everything back in and made sure it was working, and it is. I'm part way now through removing the capacitors. This is the first time I've done this, so this is definitely a learning experience. Put Kapton tape on here because this is the next one I want to get off. I've got those two off there. There's two here that remain extremely close to these sockets, so very easy to melt those. I put Kapton tape on, but yeah, I'm going to struggle to try and get those out without causing any damage. This one, again, is extremely close. Part of the reason for that is I've got these desoldering pincers. These are actually pretty cheap. It's a Gordak 902. I bought this from China on AliExpress. I think it was only something like 30 or 40 pounds, something like that. But the problem is the way these pincers sort of go inwards like this, like a sort of S curve, isn't great, to be honest. This one here actually bends outwards a little bit as well. It doesn't bend inwards, which would be better because then it would, you know, give you a much finer grip. So what you really want really is for these to touch in the middle, and you can see they don't really touch very well. So yeah, I guess you get what you pay for. Maybe there is a compatible pair of these tweezers that I can get that would work a little bit better. I'm not sure. But I actually did buy another one. I've got this one here, and it's the same, company. And you can see that the pincers on this one are much coarser. I guess they would have much more thermal mass. What I might do is actually I might swap these in and give these a try. Let me show those to you. Yeah, so they're much thicker. And they may work a little bit better. We'll see. So I'll give these a try actually next on this one. And if it doesn't work, then I'll swap back to these. Okay, so I'm going to turn on these irons. I've got them set pretty high. I found I had to do that for them to work really. I've already put flux on, and on each of these caps I've also tried to put some new solder. I've done that to every single cap that I'm trying to remove. The truth of the matter is that I believe these were leaking because when I tested these out and put in some new solder, I found there was a slight fishy smell, which is indicative of the fact that the electrolyte is leaking. So yeah, I mean, I knew before I started this that these caps were definitely due to be replaced. They had to be replaced. But it is pretty clear now that they were definitely starting to leak at least. So that was good that we got in now. So yeah, let's just wait for a second, a little bit longer, and then I'll try getting this out. Let me try right now just to see what sort of temperature we have. There we are, just popped. Now in this case, it's actually come up a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clip it underneath. I'm going to put the tongs back in their holder, make sure I don't burn anything. And I'm just going to try and get underneath this and just clip out its legs. There we are, that's both out. And what I want to do is try and gently lift this off. There's a bit of extra solder there. I'm just trying to get it out of the way. I'm just going to try and lift this off gently. Ease that off, and then hopefully now I can desolder that later. That's what I'm finding with these tweezers. They're not really working that well. So to keep the length of this video manageable, I'm going to jump in here and explain what happened in the next few minutes. I could show you a repeat of what just happened, but in fact, it is actually quite repetitive. It's very similar scenarios sort of continue to happen across the board. Later on, as you'll see, I actually removed the caps from the Apple IIe card, and they came off extremely easily. I put the tweezers on, I gripped them, and they just lifted off without any fight. But on this board, pretty much every single cap would do the same thing. It would actually start to melt and disintegrate before the solder at the base of the cap would actually go molten and then allow the cap to come off. I think maybe one of them came off easily, but apart from that, it was a very repetitive procedure. So what I've concluded from that is that these caps were obviously leaking. As I said, there was a fishy odor when I removed pretty much every single one of them. And what's happened is the electrolyte has actually gone into the legs and tainted the solder and made its melting temperature very high. And because of that, you just basically can't get enough heat into those legs to get them off. And what I would conclude from this is that maybe in that circumstance where you have caps which are which have leaked or are in the process of leaking, it may be a better technique to use the snipping technique that I showed you, where you get underneath the can and you just basically cut it off. It destroys the cap, but we know these caps are leaking anyway, so there's nothing really to preserve. What you do want to preserve, obviously, is the solder pads. So yeah, once that was done, I then went over the board and made an effort to get rid of the excess solder. I put that solder on to help in the process of getting the caps off. But obviously, once you've removed the caps, you then have excess solder underneath them. So you need to remove that using solder wick, as you can see that I'm doing here. So with all of that said, I hope it makes sense now why I appear to be struggling so much to get the caps off. And talking about struggling, let me hand back to myself as I finish off on the remainder of the board. Let's see what the damage is. Hopefully no damage, but maybe we might have one of the pads lifting, which isn't a good sign, but what can we do? Let me get some Q-tips and clean this up. Okay, so I've cleaned up the pads, and as you can see, they're looking pretty nifty. I've checked them, and they all seem to have continuity. For instance, this one here, going to its via, this one here, actually this one here. Can I get it to make contact? There we go. Here. So on and so forth. All good. Now, the problem is this one here has started to lift big time. But I've gone to its via and it still has continuity. So I watched a video on how to repair traces, and basically the only thing you can really do is to either solder a wire between the via and the pad and then try and get that connect to the capacitor, or you can actually leave that where it is because it is still connected, but it's very fragile right now. But once I have a piece of solder on the other pad here, that should then be relatively strong, and that should then hold that in place and just basically hold it down. So what I need to do is, once I've made the solder there and put the capacitor on, I need to check on the other side of the board that we do have a connection between the capacitor and the via on the other side of the board, and that will then show that we haven't lost continuity there. All the other traces look good, so I think we're good. So I think the next thing we need to do is think about actually getting the capacitors on there. There is one other thing. As I said, the Apple IIe card actually has a problem which may be capacitor related as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace these caps with correctly rated caps for this board. I bought those. So off camera, I'm just going to take these off as well. Same technique as we've used on the rest of this board. So hopefully they will come off a little bit easier, but as we saw today, it's proven not to be that easy. I think that's maybe because this board had caps that were leaking, even though it wasn't that visible. Definitely was getting a fishy smell as soon as I did any kind of soldering at the base of any caps. Whereas this board actually looks a little bit cleaner. So yeah, fingers crossed these come off a little bit easier. Okay, so that was remarkable. The difference in getting the capacitor off here compared to getting off the LC475 board was like night and day. These are the two caps that I got off here. And you can see both of them came off intact. I just basically had to pincer them and wait. And then after about 5 seconds, something like that, they just literally lifted off with no resistance whatsoever. So I think what we can learn from that is that this board hadn't started leaking yet. So I'm wondering if my theory about the caps being on this causing the disk drives not to work may not be true. It could actually be the logic board, the LC475, possibly not supplying enough power for this to work, because it appears that the caps on this were not necessarily on their way out. They seem to have been a lot better. And after cleaning up the pads, they are absolutely mint, as you can see as well. No issues about lifting or whatever. So I think it was definitely true that the LC475 had been leaking for a while. Yeah, oh yeah, no fishy smell here either. None whatsoever. So definitely the LC475 had been leaking. It had degraded the pads, it had degraded the solder, and that was why these tweezers here were proving to be what I thought were a poor solution. But no, when the solder is actually okay, it's fine. I don't know what the answer is then in terms of how you do it in quotes correctly. You know, how would you do this if you've got degraded solder? We've got a single pad on the LC475, which is marginal now. You know, it may not work necessarily, and we might have to do a bodge on it. So if anybody out there has any tips on how you can get past that issue, then I would definitely like to see those in the comments. But as we've seen, in fairer winds, you can actually do it quite easily. This has come off, and I'm very, very, very happy about how that came off. So yeah, I think the next stage now is we're going to get a cap on. Now, I think because this was so easy to get off, I'm going to use this as a learning situation to actually get a cap on, because these pads are in very good condition, no degrading, no cap juice or anything like that. So yeah, I think what we'll do next is we'll get some flux on here, get a little bit of solder on, and then we can see if we can actually solder on the two capacitors for this. Let me go and get those. We'll do that next. Okay, so these are the caps. I bought these from China separately from the rest of the order. And the reason for that is that I'd already actually ordered the caps for the LC475, and then I suddenly realized I should probably recap the card at the same time, and then I'd already ordered it from, I think it was Moe's or something like that. And the problem with those companies is they charge a lot of money for delivery. So you might order, let's say, 60 pence worth of components, and then they charge you £8.50 delivery. So that's kind of crazy. So I bought these separately from China, decent brand. And yeah, so they came in a pack of 10, and I've already actually taken 2 out. There they are. They are ceramic, tantalum, whatever you want to call it, capacitors, which means they are not polarized, which means they can go on the board whichever way around you fancy. It doesn't make any difference. So I'm just going to put those out the way. I've already tested them to see how long they are, because there's one thing looking at them, there's another thing put them on the board, and you can see that when I put it on the board, there, hopefully you can see that. Well, I can see it. There's some silver at either end, which is nice. I was a little bit worried that it would actually be pretty much the size of the pads. Then underneath there, you can see there are the contacts. So let's just put those out the way for a second. And what I'm going to do is just put a tiny bit of flux on the 2 sets of pads. This is chip quick. I don't need a lot of it. Same here. Then we're just going to put on a tiny bit of solder on each pad, and then hopefully that is going to take to the capacitor once we solder it in. So this is Weller solder, and it actually does have some flux in its core, so you don't necessarily need the flux, but I think it's a good thing to put it on. Just helps things go on a bit easier. So let me just try and get this solder onto the pads. And I'm going to put on a small amount. I don't want a huge amount because I don't want it to sit under the capacitor too much. There we are. Now the same here. Okay, right. So I'm just going to clean this off. Well, I'm going to have a go at positioning one of the capacitors. And the trick is, I believe, you pin it down at one end so that it's then held in place. That's the trickiest part. And then you've got to solder the other end. So obviously, it may not be possible for me to get this in position and you be able to see this. So apologies if you can't quite see this as I do this. So I'm going to set that there. That's quite nice. And now I'm going to try and solder one end of it. That was good. And now I'm going to use the tweezers to adjust it slightly off angle, ever so slightly. There we go. Now the other way. It'd be tricky to get this. A little bit of a blob of solder on the iron. And hopefully that will go in. Just try and get a bit of flux on it. There we are. Try and do that again. There we are, that's good. Right, let's check that. Make sure that's on, nice and tight. Yeah, good. Okay, now the next one. So let's lift that into position first. There we are. It's not quite right. Let's just reposition it ever so slightly. It's almost certainly going to move when I put some solder on it anyway, so there's no point getting too pernickety about it at this stage. Let's just try and get it pinned in there. Yeah. Okay, now let's try and get it straight. Now the other side. There we are. I think it's okay. Let's check both ends. Yeah, looks good. Definitely looks good. Yeah. Okay, let's just clean that up. That's nice and clean. Now this end, let's just use this to take off the gross amount of flux first. That's the other end then to try and... It's got some alcohol on this end. Should put a bit of alcohol on here. There we go. Okay, what did I learn from that? Well, less is more. You don't really need that much solder on the pad, so you need to try and give it as little as you can really, I suppose. And then I guess put flux on top of that and then allow it to flow under when you do it. So yeah, these aren't perfectly straight, but I believe they will do the job. It is actually connected. So we should be good. And just need to take the Kapton tape off now. No longer needed, so we shouldn't be melting this. So I'll put this out of the way, keep it safe, and let's move back onto the LC475 board. So in that last section, we actually soldered on the capacitors onto the card, and those were the first caps I actually soldered at all in this project. With that done, apparently successfully, which was pretty cool, I then moved on to working on the board, which you can see here. Now, if I hold that up to you, I don't know if you can see it from there, but there are caps soldered in place all the way across the board. Unfortunately, this is the second attempt I've made of actually putting the caps on to this board, and I'll explain what actually happened. I went through the process of putting on the caps. As I said earlier, they weren't polarized, so I basically just put them on whichever way around they came out of my container. And when I was finished, I checked them all. I made sure that everything was correct as far as I could see. Everything seemed to be soldered correctly. Then I put it back on the table here because I have my monitor here and I've got the power supply over here as well. And the other thing I would have to say is when you're working with these machines, always remember to put the PRAM battery back in, because if you don't do that, you won't actually get any video. So I did that at first to test what was going on, and I didn't get any video. But more concerning than that was the fact that I actually had the blue SCSI external plugged in on the back. And this has a little LED on it, which shows you when the power is turned on. I think it's a blue LED somewhere around here. And this was basically turning on, turning off, turning on, turning off. And I could also hear a very subtle clicking noise as well. And that, to me, is indicative of the power supply going into protection mode. And then it would turn on again, supply power to the board, would go into protection mode, so it would go off again, and this would repeat pretty quickly. It was about once every, I don't know, 1.5 seconds, 2 seconds, something like that. So you can imagine my heart absolutely sank. After putting the caps on, somehow, somewhere, I'd managed to create a short on the board. And I went online and I was reading up about other people's efforts to recap general machines, and specifically the LC475. And there was one post in particular that really resonated with me. It said that they had a short as well. And they said that they had discovered that when they had soldered on their cap, the solder had actually gone underneath and bridged the two pads together and created a short. And you know how difficult it was to get the caps off this board. And as we know, 2 of the pads were marginal. You know, they weren't attached to the fiberglass very well anymore. So my heart sank, because I thought, well, if I'm going to have to take these caps off, and I don't know which one has the short, it's probably going to result in maybe the marginal pads coming off, and then me having to try and do some kind of bodge to get those fixed. So yeah, things had gone from going pretty well, I thought, apart from the difficulty of getting the caps off, which was semi-anticipated, you know, the leaking of the caps on the board. All of a sudden we had a board that just didn't work anymore, you know, had a short on it. And even worse, it looked like I might have to take off all 11 caps potentially to find out which one of them was the short. You know, I didn't know which one of them it was. It could have been any one of them. And, you know, with bad luck, you might have to literally take off all of them and then discover when you take off the last one that that was the problem. So I've learned from experience that when you're in a situation like this, probably the best thing to do is to take a break and come back to it later. Unfortunately, before I did that, I did think that I would try and take one of the caps off just to see how difficult it would be, to see how much trouble it would be. And I decided to go with hot air. I don't know why I decided to do that. I think it's because I'd seen other people taking off SMD caps using hot air, and that was like a preferred method. So I thought, you know, that seems to be maybe the gentlest method. Yeah, I decided to give that a go. I put the hot air on, and it was on the tantalum cap. It was actually this one here. And I was wafting the hot air around quite nicely, you know, going to one end of the cap and then the other to make sure that I got both pads at the same time, you know, gently heating it up. And then eventually the solder started to bubble, and I could see that it was ready to come off. And I had a pair of tweezers, and I started to lift it off with the tweezers. And as I did so, I noticed that the pad nearest to me had come off from the board. Yeah, I mean, what do they say about if you find yourself in a hole, stop digging? Yeah, so yeah, it was at this point, you know, as I said, my vice kicked in, and I thought, my God, I don't really want to cause any more damage, so I'm just going to leave this for the day. I retired to my house, and yeah, I was a little bit quiet. I was watching TV and relaxing, but I don't know about yourself, but when you're working on things like this, if it hasn't gone well, if there's like something that you need to do, it's very difficult to get it out of your head. You become a little bit obsessive about it. And so I was trying to watch TV and not think about it, but I really couldn't. I just kept on thinking about it. So I went to bed, you know, had a good sleep, woke up in the morning, and I literally, I don't know if you've had this as well, where something really bad has happened and then you've had a sleep and you wake up and you don't remember it happening, and then you remember it and you go, oh no, yeah, that was real. So yeah, that's what I was like. I was lying in bed and I literally was like going, you know, with a sort of anxiety of what I'd done. I felt terrible. Honestly, I really felt terrible. So I went to work and I worked that day. And then in the evening, I thought, okay, well, let's see what I can do. I spoke to one of the people out in the community, who's an expert in doing repairs and actually also making machines from scratch. And he was too busy to help me with it, unfortunately. He's actually moved home recently, so I understand he's probably very, very busy with DIY and getting everything sorted out there, so that's fair enough. But we had a bit of a chat and he gave me some advice. And what I decided to do next was to try and use the pincers to try and take off one of the other caps. I also had a thought about the capacitors. What about if they weren't non-polarized? What about if they were polarized caps? Because that would cause a short, wouldn't it? So I went back to the AliExpress order that I placed. And the problem with AliExpress is very often when you order something, it's not that clear from the order description exactly what it is that you've ordered. Anyway, I had a look at that. And I couldn't really determine from that whether the caps were polarized or not. But I did watch a recapping video by, is it Brackus? Brackus, I think it is, Australian chap. And this video was actually from about 5 years ago, doing you know what. It's quite a slow video, you know, he goes through it in real time. And this is one of the reasons why I decided not to do, you know, this full recapping video in real time, because it just take too long. But during the video, he did mention that the caps that he were putting on were polarized and remarkably look exactly the same as the ones that I was using. They had a band on them. So yeah, it looked like I'd made a mistake. It looked like the caps were actually polarized. So the first thing I did was I went back and looked at the IIe card, and I could see that on the IIe card, one of the caps, the one on the right-hand side, had gone on in the right orientation, and the one on the left was wrong. So I decided that, again, because that card was in good condition, I would try out using the tweezers to take off that tantalum cap and then reverse it and solder it back on. So got the tweezers, put a little bit of extra solder on either end of the tantalum cap just to make sure that the heat could transfer underneath it nicely. Put it on, waited for a few seconds, it became loose, it came off. Fantastic, I was so happy about that it hadn't put up a fight. So I then you know, flipped it around and then cleaned the cap because it was covered in flux. So I cleaned it with a bit of alcohol to get it nice and clean again. Did the same thing with the pads, used some solder braid to clean it up, and then I soldered it back on. Made sure that was all good. Fantastic. I obviously couldn't test it because the LC475 was still broken. I went to the LC475 and I cleaned up that capacitor, which had removed the pad. Then I cleaned up the pads and with some alcohol, and I got it really nice and clean. What I wanted to see was where its power was coming from. And I could see a via coming from its right, but I couldn't quite see where it went. It went underneath the capacitor to its right. So I'm talking about, and I'll show you this on video actually. Yeah, this cap here on the right was still soldered to the board. So at this point I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna have to basically bite the bullet and remove all the caps on this board which are in the wrong orientation. Turned out to be 4 of them, luckily. And the 2 hardest ones to solder on, the ones which are between the PDS and the power supply for the hard drive, thank God they were on the right way. Just turned out that by chance they were facing in the right direction, because that was really, really difficult to get those soldered on. So I got the tweezers, I did the same procedure again. I put solder on either end of each cap, put on the tweezers, and they all came off very, very cleanly, which was great. The 2 pads, which were marginal, still appeared to be marginal, but they still appeared to be working. I toned them out with my multimeter, and yeah, that seemed to be working fine. So we hadn't lost any more pads, which was fantastic. Then obviously I put them back on the correct way around. Oh, actually no, there is a very important step here that I did. Once I got them all off, you know, when I was chatting with a guy who was explaining about, you know, some tips about reworking and repairing, one of the things he said was these are just smoothing caps. They smooth out the power supply. They just make the board work better, but it should actually function without them. So at this point, what I wanted to do was make sure that I'd actually got rid of the short. So I plugged it into the setup here, plugged in the power supply, put in all the memory, the speaker so you can hear the bong, you know, to see if it's happy or not. Plugged it in. I heard a bong, which was a really, really happy moment, believe me. And then I waited for a few seconds whilst the video booted up. And it didn't do anything because I hadn't put the blue SCSI in. So I attached the blue SCSI, tried it again, and it actually started booting, which is fantastic. Obviously, I had to put the CPU back in as well. So at this point, I was still using the original one. So anyway, once that was done, what I did was I then soldered on the caps. I soldered them on. Actually, I soldered on one at first in the right orientation, checked it. And then I did two more, checked it again, still booting. And then I did the rest of them because, you know, it seemed to be working fine. And then by the time I'd finished, I had all the caps back on in the right orientation, apart from one, and everything was still working. So the one, obviously, I couldn't put back on was this one here. It had lost its cap down here. So what I did was I actually looked, well, actually, no, let me go back a bit. The one to the right of it here was off as well. And what that allowed me to see was that there was a wire coming from it and feeding the, I think it was the plus side of the capacitor. So it was supplying the voltage to both pads. So I'd lost the pad on the right, the pad on the left was still intact, and the trace going from it to the right, to the pad that was missing, was still there. I thought to myself, do I want to put like a tiny piece of wire on that wire, maybe scrape it off, and then solder on a very thin piece of wire onto the wire? But what I decided to do in the end, just to make it a little bit more sturdy than that, was to actually solder a piece of diode leg, which I snipped off from a diode I haven't used yet. You know, they have very big leads on them, so they're quite good as a source of quite thin wire like that. So I cut it to length and I laid it onto the pad and I soldered it onto the pad, going straight across the trace onto the other pad and across it. And I was going to then try and use that to connect up the other capacitor. I soldered on the first capacitor, the one on the pad that still existed, making sure that made nice contact. And then I soldered on the other one and I made sure that the flux went underneath and the solder went underneath and that it actually bonded with both the pad on the capacitor and the pin which I'd laid as a replacement for the pad. I then used a multimeter to tone out the end of both caps and they were both connected together. So I checked this, by the way, on the schematic to make sure that they actually were in parallel, and they were. This was actually the way it was designed to be. So that looked like a potential fix. I plugged it back in and the board was basically working again. And I couldn't believe, I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I actually got it back from what seemed to be the brink of disaster. Think about it. Earlier on, you know, the night before, when I'd gone to bed, I had in front of me the prospect of removing all 11 caps. And after removing one cap, I'd already lost a pad. And the pitch on this board of the traces and the wires is absolutely tiny. It's about 0.5 millimeter wide, each trace. So I just thought to myself, that's going to be a nightmare. And it isn't always obvious where those traces and wires go off to. In many cases, the wires are actually underneath the capacitor that you've got to take off, so you can't actually see where they go to. So yeah, honestly, that was just a nightmare averted. So I was very happy about that. So with that done, the board was basically back in the same position as when I'd started. It was working. The video was still bad, still had the vertical stripes, so the recapping hadn't done anything to do with that. And I didn't really think it would, so wasn't very surprised about that. So I think what we're going to do is, because this video is quite long, I think I'm going to skip showing you me recapping the power supply. I do have all the caps. They're all electrolytic. There are guides out there, which I will link to in the description for this video, which actually show you the capacitors and where they fit in the power supply. I have a particular power supply, which I'll put up on screen now to tell you what it is. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to follow that guide, you know, desolder the caps, put the new ones back in the right orientation, hopefully. Yeah. And then basically that should be good. And I'm probably going to do that as the last thing that I do before I finish off here, but I'm not going to do that on camera. I think what we'll do in the next chapter is I'll explain to you what came next, which is trying to fix the video on this machine. So yeah, amazing. I actually managed to get this working again after basically buggering it up myself. Yeah, it's a learning experience. I am not an experienced repair person. I am learning as I go along, and we all make mistakes. So yeah, for those out there who get these caps, the tantalum caps, they are polarized, and you do have to put them on to match up with the polarity that you can actually see on a silk screen. So yeah, I definitely learned that lesson here. So what we need to do next is try and fix the video. Now, as I said earlier, I don't have a microscope. You could actually help out to help the channel by joining the channel, and that would help to pay for a microscope. That's definitely on my list of things to get. It would make filming a lot easier, and it would make repairs much more viable. This was, well, everything on here has been extremely difficult due to the pitch on here. It's very, very small. And also I need to get another camera as well, so that, for instance, if I'm filming what I'm doing when I'm doing repairs, then I can also talk to the camera, and that would actually make it a lot more personable as well. So anyway, we do need to fix the video. So let's crack on and do that. And to do that, I'm going to use photographs because, like I said, don't have a microscope. So photographs of the board are probably the best way to actually show you the process that I use to fix the video. So here we are. This is the LC475 logic board. I've taken a photograph. We're not going to bother with most of this. We're going to really focus here on the video area of this board because that's where the fault is, right? On the right-hand side, you can see top right, the edge connectors. There is a video connector there. So that you would expect would indicate that that's where most of the video circuitry is on the logic board. Directly underneath it there, you can see on the right-hand side, there are two SIM slots in there for the VRAM. So again, indicating that the video circuitry is in this area. To the left of it, you can see those silver pads. That's actually where a prototype ROM socket used to be. I was wondering about that when I was working on this. So I looked it up, and yeah, there used to be a ROM socket there, believe it or not, in early versions of this board. But yeah, mine is a later one and it doesn't have that. And then to the left of those, you've got the RAM, the system RAM, which it comes with. So directly above those chips, do you see there's a large chip there? Let's zoom in on that a little bit. And this is actually known as the Antelope chip. That's the name of it internally. As you can see here, it has a code name. Let's just turn that around so you can actually read that. So yeah, there you can see it's the AH8780A3. I did do a search on the internet for this on eBay, and I couldn't see anybody selling it. So if there was a fault with this chip, it looks like I wasn't going to be able to fix it anytime soon. So yeah, I was hoping that the problem lay outside of this. So to get things started on this, I actually posted on 68K MLA a while back. And there's a thread on there, which I'll link to in the notes on this video. And it's this post here, as you can see, it's from May, that Jovt, I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name, or Jovt, not quite sure really, or is it Joe VT? He says, after looking at a video that I posted showing the problem, where I basically cycled through lots of different color depths. You know, what does it look like when it's in 256 color mode? What does it look like when it's in 16 color mode, 4 color mode, and black and white grayscale, so on and so forth. So he did an analysis of my video, and he says here, looks like the line appears every 32 bits, 32 pixels in black and white, every 16 pixels in 4 color mode, 8 pixels in 16 color mode, and every 4 pixels in 256 color mode. And if you go down, there's a line that says, it appears to be the 14th pixel in black and white mode, counting from the left, and that would be data bit 18. What I take from that is, I'm going to look at the Antelope chip, and I need to find out what pin on there is actually data bit 18, and then somehow try and work out what physical pin that is actually on the chip on the logic board, which, as we'll see, isn't actually that easy. But I did have a little stroke of luck here. So yeah, anyway, we'll see that in a second. So let's have a look at the schematic for the Antelope chip. Here it is here. It's shown as being this incredibly long chip here, but in fact, that's just to allow it to show all of the pixel data lines coming in, of which there are 32. Now, I actually did try to orient myself on this chip, and I found it very difficult to do that because if you have a look at the pixel data, PD, do you see the PD lines? PD0, PD1, etc., all the way down to 31. Well, they are semi-random, really. I mean, PD0 is on pin 11, PD1 is on pin 7, PD2 is on pin 3, as you can see, and then, yeah, PD3 is on pin 67, which I assume is one of the pins just before we get back around to pin 1. So very, very tricky to orient yourself. But as I said, I did have a little bit of luck here, because if you look down to PD18, remember it's pixel data 18 that we're looking for. it says that pixel data 18 is line 1. So let's go back and have a look at the actual physical chip on the board. And you can see here, if we look down towards the bottom of the chip there, do you see there's a notch in the chip, a little moon-shaped crescent which has been cut out? That indicates which pin on that chip is pin 1. And on the logic board, you see there's a white dot just underneath it. That isn't there by mistake. I checked other logic boards, LC475's, and they all have that white dot. So that shows that that is actually pin 1. So I got my multimeter out and I measured the wires to the left of it, the pins as well. And I found that all of them had signals on except for pin number 1, which was low. So that was interesting. And it was kind of what I expected, really, that pin 1 for some reason wasn't receiving any kind of signal. So I used my multimeter to tone out the wire, which is just underneath that white dot there, to see if the signal gets from the pin all the way to the wire. Now, when I saw the white dot to start off with, I actually thought it might have been like a piece of paint or something like that, which had flecked onto the board. And I thought maybe that had corroded the wire. But no, yeah, it turns out it's actually meant to be there. And in fact, when I measured the continuity between that pin there and the wire, there was continuity. Well, basically, it was still showing the same thing, just a low signal with a little bit of noise on it, basically. So yeah, it was going to be one of those things where you have to kind of chase the trace. So what I did was I flipped over the board to the other side, and let's have a look what we find there. So this is the other side of the board, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to indicate to you here which of these wires is actually the pin 1 wire. So it's actually, from what I remember, I think it's pin number 5 in a group that you can see here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how that goes over to the left-hand side of the board, where there's a grouping of 5 wires there. And you can see it goes all the way over to the edge of the board and it ends there. And so in other words, it's going back up onto the top surface of the board. So what I did was I got my multimeter again and I toned out between the beginning of the wire and the end of the wire. And what I found was, yeah, there was continuity. So far we still had continuity. So what we have to do now is we have to flip on to the front side of the board and find out where that comes out. So yeah, this is where it gets tricky. So on the right-hand side there, do you see the number 68? Well, that's actually just to the left of a cluster of wires. And if you remember the shape of those 5 wires that were on the left-hand side of the board, on the back side of the board, you can see that they correspond to that shape. So I could see that those wires actually came through here, literally just outside that VRAM chip there. So I was starting to get the impression that maybe this connection would go down to one of these pins here on the SIM slot. So what I did was I looked to the left, and out of those 5 wires there, I believe it's one of the 2 in the middle. So in other words, I think it's the 3rd one to the right or the 4th one to the right. And they're in a little pair, and their wires go to the left. And on the left-hand side, you can see those 2 traces go off underneath the SIM slot and never to be seen again. So yeah, that was a problem. I couldn't actually work out exactly which pin they go to. Let's go to another page on the schematics. This is the video RAM bank page. And what we're looking for here is PD18. So if you have a look on the left-hand side, you can see there's a SIM slot there. And if you look about, I think it's 5 pins down, something like that, 4 pins down, you've got PD18. So that appears to be data line number 18. So that should be connected up with the pin on the chip. I toned that out with my multimeter and I didn't have continuity. I wasn't quite sure if I should be going on pin number 4 or number 5, but then I realized that pin number 1 there is actually just 5 volts. It's not a data line. So, and it's shown out of line with all the others. So I realized, in fact, that PD18 is actually pin number 5 on the underside of the board. Again, it was quite confusing because I wasn't quite sure from this diagram which of the 2 SIM slots was the one on the left and which one was on the right. They're both labeled here as J4, which is really useful. So that was a bit confusing. So what I did was I toned out both pin 5s on both sockets. And I tried, actually, I couldn't find any continuity. So what I did was I tried all of the pins around them as well, just in case I'd miscounted it or something like that. And I just could not find any continuity with pin 1 on the Antelope chip. So at this point, I thought, well, there is some uncertainty. We've seen the traces going underneath the SIM sockets, and we don't know exactly where they connect, although the schematic here does indicate it connects to pin 5 of one of the 2 sockets, of which we're not quite sure which one is which. So what I did was I went back to that cluster that we saw earlier, and on the left-hand edge, I scraped a little bit of the solder mask away, and I used a scalpel to scrape away at the via as well to make sure that I got the copper from the via a little bit exposed. Once I got that exposed, I got a DuPont connector cable, which is very thin. And as you can see, I just stripped off a little bit of the end and I tinned that with my soldering iron to make sure it had some solder on it. I then put a little bit of flux on the exposed copper on the via there. And then what I did was I just put the soldering iron there until they touched. And then I actually managed to get that wire soldered onto the logic board. So now I had a piece of wire, and I left it quite long, actually, longer than it needed to be, that could reach all the way over to pin 5 on either of those 2 sockets. So the next thing to do was to try out putting that piece of wire up against different pins. I did find it quite tricky, as I said, to work out exactly which pin was which. But eventually, and this was with a hallelujah moment, I put the wire against pin number 5 on the right-hand side socket, the one closest to the edge of the logic board. And when I did that, the lines went away. Now, what was interesting was I tried some of the other pins around it. Like I said, I wasn't quite sure what was pin 5 and which socket it should be on. What I found was it actually partially went away. Sometimes the lines would go away in the header on the Mac. Obviously, I had to have the Mac turned on while I was doing this. And sometimes the body, the background of the desktop, the lines would go away there. So I was getting these kind of false positives, but the difference was when I put the wire onto the actual pin 5, it was a complete transformation. All of a sudden, all of the lines went away everywhere. The little pixel artifacts that I've been seeing in the Apple logo went away. All of a sudden, I had a perfectly clean picture and I was absolutely elated. So finally, we've got the video working fully on this machine. I've only had this machine for, I don't know, it must be about 4 years now, 3 to 4 years. And I've never actually seen it do proper graphics until yesterday, actually. Today's the following day from when I actually did the repair. And yeah, I'm very, very happy. I've got the machine set up, got everything plugged back in. Obviously, it's not back in the case yet. But we've got the Apple IIe card as well, which you would have seen from the last video, hopefully. If not, go back and watch that and the one before it. Yeah, we've got the floppy EMU here, everything's plugged in. So let's turn it on and I'll show you the difference between the graphics of what it used to look like when it used to boot and what it looks like now. So let me just turn on the monitor. There we go, it's booted up. And we're onto the desktop and no more vertical lines anymore. I just want to highlight some of the things that I was seeing before. There used to be glitches on the Apple logo. It used to have little pixels which were different colors. This area at the top of the page, the menu bar, that was all stripy with yellow bars. And yeah, I think the background, the field inside the windows was also full of stripes as well. I'm just going to show you a little image from when I was using the IIe card, and just before it switches into running the IIe, it goes into a different display mode. I think it's 16 colors. That particular mode is also very often left enabled when you come out of the card. And this is what it looked like before. I haven't got many graphics here, but just the window. But yeah, when it goes into 16 color, it used to look particularly horrible. Also when it was in black and white as well, where you have these black lines everywhere. But now, as you can see, if we go into 16 color mode, just bring up the control bar here, 16 colors. And as you can see, it looks absolutely mint. It looks pretty much as good as it does in 256 colors. Obviously, it doesn't have as many colors, but at least it looks decent here, which is really, really great. Yeah, as I said, let's have a look at 4 colors. Again, perfect. And let's go back old school, back to 1984, then black and white. Yeah, every single mode works perfectly now. The machine is back on its feet again. And once I got it working, what I did was I ran the Apple IIe. So let me do that. I've got task times and tone down in there. And whenever I was running even the Apple IIe as well, I had the same problems because it's the graphics chip of the LC that actually does the graphics for the Apple There's no actual graphics chip, I think, on the card itself. And I was getting these vertical lines as well. So when task times loads up, this is what it should look like. And previously I had these horrible lines going down the screen all the time. So yeah, also working perfectly well now. So very, very chuffed with that. And yeah, so what are we going to do next? Well, there's just one last thing, which is that it's possible to actually overclock this machine using a software patch. It's a control panel actually. But I want to go a little bit further than overclocking this 25 megahertz CPU because I have a 40 megahertz CPU. So what I would be interested in seeing is actually how fast it can go with that in there. So let me turn off the machine. I'm going to swap over the CPUs. I've already got that control panel installed and I'll link to that in the notes for the video. And let's see how far we can actually overclock it. And also, will it run stable in the IIe card as well? So yeah, let's look a quick look at that before we finish off. Okay, so this is the, well, I was going to say the original 68040 from this machine. It's actually not, it's a replacement. This actually has an FPU on it. The original one is a low-cost version which doesn't have an FPU because LC stands for low cost. Yeah, and funnily enough, they use the same naming convention on the Motorola chips as well. So yeah, there was a low-cost 68040 in this machine. So I've replaced this one with the 40 megahertz version, and right now the machine's actually running in 32-bit addressing mode. So let me just show you that. We'll go to the control panels, memory. There we are. So you can see the 32-bit addressing is turned on. That's important because the control panel that we're going to use, the little widget, I don't know what it's called there, the quick bar or whatever it's called, that only runs or actually only takes effect when you have 32-bit addressing mode turned on. That's going to have a material effect on us a little bit later. It's a bit of a pity because, yeah, if it wasn't for that, this would be great for absolutely everything. But yeah, it does impose a little bit of a limitation. So if I show that bar, there is the little drop up. And you can see you've got 20 megahertz, 25 megahertz, 33 and 40. Now, previously, the way that people would overclock these machines is to put in a 25 megahertz CPU, and then on the back, they would change there's a little group of resistors, and you have to change those around so you can put it into a higher clock speed. Once you've done that, there were also boards that you can then put in to overclock it. In my case, I think I would probably still have to change those resistors to get 40 megahertz to work, because when I put the 40 megahertz CPU in this machine and turned it on and then benchmarked it, it benchmarked as a 25 megahertz 68040, which is, I thought that was a bit weird. But obviously the machine is set up to run for 25 megahertz, and therefore it was treating the CPU as if it was a 25 megahertz CPU. So anyway, right now we have the 40 megahertz CPU in there. I'll show you some benchmarks on it, and let's see what that looks like. So first of all, we'll just make sure we've got it set for 40. That actually works on the fly, which is pretty cool. So I'm just going to run speedometer here, and I'm going to use the comparison option up here, system comparisons. Let's open that up. And on the right-hand side, what I'll go for is a Centris 650, which comes out to be basically, in terms of CPU at least, 1-for-1 with a Quadra 605. This is an LC475, and if you watch my video on whether this is an LC475 or a Quadra 605 or what was the other one, a Performer 475, it's all three of those machines. The logic board in this is, as far as I know, identical to all three machines. So yeah, we want to get a benchmark that actually matches the Quadra 605, because that basically is this machine with a 68040 and a 25 megahertz without an FPU. Hope that makes sense. So let's go to tests, and we'll run all the tests. It takes a little bit of time, so let's let that carry on. It asks you which disk you want to use. I just want to use the blue SCSI. And the screen will do various things. I may have to fiddle with a monitor at some point because it may actually go off and not come back on again. This monitor isn't very good at recovering from the machine going into sleep mode and things like that. So let's just leave it run away. And so yeah, let's talk about the 24-bit, 32-bit issue. The reason why 32-bit addressing is an issue is because the Apple IIe card, which is in here, won't actually run when that's turned on. It's going to be in 24-bit addressing mode, which is a bit of a pain really. So I can either have the 68040 running at 25 megahertz in 24-bit addressing mode with the Apple IIe card, or I can turn on 32-bit addressing, not have the IIe card able to run, but then I'll be able to clock the machine at 40 megahertz, the full speed of the CPU in there. So I'm not sure whether I want to keep the CPU in here. I may actually put it in an Amiga over there. I've got an Amiga 4000 and that has 6840 in it. I think that might be a 25 megahertz version. So that would be quite a nice overclock for that machine actually. So yeah, we'll see. Maybe it can be shared between different machines. Okay, so the benchmarks are finished. So let's close down all these little windows. These are the separate reports. And you can see that this machine is 1.37 times faster, so 37% faster than a 605 Quadra. The graphics are 1.4 compared to 0.79, so suspiciously fast. I don't quite understand why that is. Maybe the FPU unit gets used in the graphics. Could be, not sure. The disk is 2.86, which is way, way faster than a classic Mac, you know, the 605. The math is 23.29. The Quadra 605, 4.39, and the PR, not quite sure what the PR is, to be honest. That's 1.72 versus 0.94. And if you have a look at all the other benchmarks, they're basically all well in advance of this machine. The math obviously is the biggest difference, and that's because this has an FPU. Obviously, it's running at 40 megahertz as well, and that's compared to the LC475 Quadra 605, which doesn't have. So yeah, there's a massive difference in mathematics performance, floating point maths anyway. So yeah, as I said, if I wanted to run the IIe card, let's try doing that, and you'll see that I get rebuffed. It says you can't do that, you need to turn off 32-bit addressing. But if I do that, as I said, it'll work perfectly fine. So overclocking is a bit of a mixed bag on this machine, at least in this particular case. I'm not sure if anybody out there has tried setting the resistors to be at 40 megahertz and if that works with a IIe card. In other words, when you set the jumpers to being 40 megahertz, are you also able to leave the machine in 24-bit addressing mode? I don't know if that's a thing that you can do. Like I said, I think it's probably better if I just leave it the way it is, because I can change the frequency in software, which is really nice. And I do get that speed boost. So if I'm going to do anything on the Mac side of things, I can basically go into 32-bit addressing mode, turn on 40 megahertz, off I go, really fast machine. And then if I want to use the Apple IIe card, 24-bit mode, reboot, off I go as well. It'll obviously go back down to 25 megahertz. Now, one of the reasons why I thought it might be useful to go over 25 megahertz is that I've heard others say that the graphics on the Apple IIe card is driven by the processor. And on the original LC, I think it actually wasn't quite up to the task. And because of that, the graphics sometimes would actually run slower than they would on a real Apple II, which is kind of ironic. But this is a 68040, and I think it's a much, much faster processor. So I think even at 25 megahertz, this machine will probably run the Apple IIe card perfectly fine as far as I'm aware. I did try playing Choplifter on it. It seemed to be running at what I would call full speed. You do get lag sometimes, but that's just the nature of the Apple II because everything was basically done by the 6502 processor, basically. So yeah, it did have bottlenecks in terms of performance. So yeah, that's overclocking on this particular machine. So there we go. This video has been, yeah, a bit of a roller coaster of emotions for me. I did manage to, what I thought, that actually destroyed the logic board on this machine. I know that sounds a bit overdramatic, but sometimes when you're doing reworking of boards like this, taking off capacitors and things like that, it's pretty high stakes poker. This is an old machine. It's 30 years old at this point. It's had capacitors leaking in it, and that has caused some structural changes. I don't think it's too dramatic to say that to the logic board. It gets into the fiberglass and it gets underneath the pads and things like that, and it weakens them. That's just the reality of it. If you have really bad leaking, it can actually cause boards to start delaminating. And when you start adding heat into the mix as well, that can cause further problems. Now, the caps had been leaking. That caused the solder on the different pads to become contaminated to one degree or another. That meant that I had to use more heat, and that caused a couple of the pads to be marginal once I actually got the caps off. So that's been a learning experience for me. I'm not sure if I can do anything with that knowledge. Maybe adding more solder beforehand, just sort of like almost swamping the area with solder to get the caps off is probably a good thing, I think, because if you can get as much new solder in there into the mix, that's probably going to help the old solder to melt So yeah, that's probably one thing I've probably learned. I've seen people removing caps like this using just a heat gun, and that seems to be a viable way to do it as well. What basically happens is that the cap starts to melt and it just disintegrates, and then they just take it off. So that's one technique. There's the snipping technique as well, where you snip the bottom of the can, that crushes the bottom of the can, and the legs that go up into the can, into the electrolyte, they basically end up being detached. And then you can use a solder iron to just basically then lift those off when you're finished and then clean up with some solder wick. So yeah, anyway, I'll have to try and, ingest the learnings that I took from what happened. Luckily, in the end, the aeroplane didn't quite crash, or rather, I would say it kind of crashed. Didn't really burn, but definitely one of the wings came off. And then I very quickly had a sort of moment of inspiration the following day, got the wing back on, got the aeroplane back up in the air. And it's just amazing that the machine's working again, really. Not only is it working again, but it's working perfectly. The sound is great. Everything seems to work fine. The SCSI is fantastic. Everything's working tickety-boo. Fingers crossed it stays like that for a while. Then later in the video, as you saw, we went through the process that I followed to fix the video on this. And that was quite interesting, actually. The very difficult bit I found was that the schematic and the physical chip on the board, it was very difficult to work out exactly which pins matched up. I was trying to tone them out and they didn't seem to match up. And the only reason why I was doing that was I was trying to validate that pin 1 was the pin next to the white dot. And it turned out I didn't really need to do that because, I mean, it was a smoking gun that it was basically one of the few of a row of what appeared to be data lines because they were all basically showing waveforms. That was the only one that was dead. And as we saw, when I traced the traces all the way around, and that was quite difficult to do, we found in the end it ended up with the pins of the SIM socket, and that particular trace path that went all the way around never connected to any pins on the SIM. So that showed that there was some kind of break because that pin definitely went to something on the VRAM. And then, of course, I put in my bodge wire and then tried out the different pins around. And when I tried pin 5, what turned out to be pin 5, because again, it was quite hard to identify what was what, we got this perfectly working graphics that you can see here. So I've actually put the machine into 24-bit addressing mode, and that means that I can actually start up the 2E. So let's do that. And yeah, what would I say about the future doing stuff like this? Well, it would have helped if I had a microscope, definitely. That would have made life a lot easier because doing the very fine work that I was doing was very, very difficult without a microscope. I was just using sort of jeweler's goggles, with magnification. But to be honest, that's not that great either because you have to get quite close to the board. And then as you saw when I was recording the video, my head would get in the way. And well, I tried to cut out as much of that footage as I could, but still it was a pain because I had some kind of key moments where I was removing certain things and you just couldn't see it because my head was in the way. And obviously I need my head to be able to see things and think and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's not going to go away. So yeah, it'd be really good if I could get a microscope. Also, yeah, it'd be nice if I could get another camera. Although I was thinking about maybe if I do have a microscope, then possibly I don't necessarily need another camera as much because I can use my main camera, this one, to film myself, and then I can use hopefully the HDMI output of the microscope to then film what I'm actually doing on the logic board. So anyway, everything worked out in the end. The machine's working, the Apple IIe card is working, the floppy emu is working great. I'm very happy, and I hope you're happy too with this video. And if you did enjoy it, then please make sure you hit the like button because that will help it go to other people. Don't like the video, YouTube will not promote the video to other people. So please do click on the like button. It only takes a second. And I find that very often I will have hundreds or even thousands of people watching my videos and I will only get 1 or 2 likes. Well, all right, maybe 30 likes, which is a very small proportion of the people that watch the video. And I'm assuming more people like it than that. So please take a moment just to click the like button on this video and other videos that I produce. If you did come here for the first time, you've not been to the channel before, please click on the subscribe button and hopefully we'll see you again soon. And to make that happen, please click on the notify button, the little bell, and that will actually notify you when I release videos so you know when they're being released and yeah, so that you can watch them. So anyway, this video has gone on for a very, 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 very long time, so I think we need to finish. Hope you enjoyed it, and until the next time, take care and have a good day.